Welcome to Night Stories from VHS Era. You've arrived at a place where the glow of old television screens, the hum of rewinding tapes, and the softness of forgotten childhood dreams come alive once more. Each night will take a quiet journey back in time to sleepy suburbs, moonlit driveways, warm summer breezes, and the kind of memories that feel just a little too magical to be real. Here you don't need to worry. Just press play and let the night unfold. Before we begin tonight's story, let's take a moment to slow down. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it gently. And now, exhale slowly through your mouth. Let the day melt away with that breath. Again, breathe in deeply. Feel your shoulders soften. Now, release and let go of everything you don't need to carry right now. Imagine you're lying on a cozy bed in your childhood room. Outside, the wind hums softly. The light from a small lamp glows like a warm memory, and the sound of a distant VHS tape spinning fills the air with comfort. You are safe. You are still. And the night is yours. Let's begin tonight's story.
Welcome back to Night Stories from VHS Era. Let me ask you something before we begin tonight. Have you ever felt that heart-tugging mix of excitement and longing as you walked toward your mailbox, praying that today would be the day something magical arrived? Do you remember how a simple envelope could hold the entire weight of your happiness for the week, even the month? Can you still hear the creak of the mailbox lid, the rustle of bills, the flutter of air, and then nothing again? Stay with me until the end of this video, because by the time we finish tonight's story, you'll remember the sweetness of that wait, and maybe, just maybe, you'll feel a little closer to a forgotten part of yourself. It was the summer of 1994. I was 17. The kind of 17 that didn't know what was coming next, but believed with all its heart that love was everything. My world was a little town stitched together by corner stores that sold bubble tape gum, faded playgrounds with creaky swings, and houses that all seemed to lean into one another like they shared a secret. And in that world, the mailbox at the end of our cracked driveway was my altar of hope. Every morning started the same way. I'd wake up to the gentle hum of a box fan in my window and the scent of warm dust floating through the air. Mom would be in the kitchen making instant coffee from the green Maxwell house tin, and I'd pretend not to care as I slowly poured myself a bowl of Cap'n Crunch. But my ears were always tuned to one thing, the low hum of the Toastal truck, that familiar growl that came somewhere between 11 and 11:30, unless it was Mr. Donnelly's day off, and then all bets were off. Do you remember that feeling, that fluttery weight in your chest when you heard the rumble turn onto your street? Did your footsteps quicken too, as if your heart had taken over your legs? I would race outside barefoot, the concrete already hot by late morning, and I'd stand a few feet from the mailbox, trying not to look too eager. Some days, I brought my Walkman and sat on the porch swing pretending to rewind my mixtape, even though I'd already memorized the order of every song. Kiss Me by Sixpence None the Richer, I Swear by All for One, and a recorded snippet of her voice on a cassette that I played so often it started to sound warped. Her name was Rachel. She lived 4 towns over, in a place that felt far away even though it was only 30 minutes by car. But we didn't have cell phones then. We didn't text or DM or FaceTime. What we had was slower, deeper. Our connection was made of lined paper, loops of blue ink, and tiny hearts drawn in the margins. She had promised to write back. I had sent my letter first, carefully folded, sprayed with the faintest mist of Dad's Brut cologne, Too much and it smelled like a high school locker room. Too little and I feared it wouldn't linger. I had waited 3 days before mailing it, rereading it over and over until my words blurred into one long, breathless sentence. I had written her about the fireflies in my backyard, about the way her handwriting made me feel like the world was softer, and how I couldn't sleep thinking about the curve of her smile. I asked her if she believed in soulmates, if she thought of me when she heard that Gin Blossom song we danced to at the roller rink. So every day after that, I checked the mailbox, and every day the same dance played out. The truck would arrive, sputtering to a stop. Mr. Donnelly would nod at me through his aviator sunglasses. I'd smile like it didn't matter. And then, bills, coupons, a postcard from Aunt Linda in Florida. No letter. Did you ever do that thing where you flipped through the mail twice just in case you missed something the first time? Did you press your fingers against the seams of envelopes, hoping one would whisper your name? I did every time. Then I'd go back inside, the house cooler but somehow heavier. I'd drop the mail on the kitchen table, grab a cold can of Surge from the fridge, and retreat to my room. There, under the posters of the Cranberries and that one from the X-Files with the words, "I want to believe," I'd stare at the ceiling and imagine her sitting at her desk, pen in hand, thinking of what to write to me. Maybe she hadn't gotten my letter yet. Maybe her mom intercepted it. Maybe she was writing the most beautiful reply and it just took time to get it right. That was the magic and the madness of it. The not knowing, the hoping. Hope has a taste. Did you know that? For me, it was a mix of anxiety and cinnamon Tic Tacs. I kept a pack in my drawer, always popping one in when I read her old letters, as if the flavor could carry me to wherever she was. Then came the Thursday. I remember because Saved by the Bell reruns were playing and I was half listening while I sorted through my CD collection. The postal truck came later than usual, the sun already starting to lean west. I wasn't going to go out. I told myself I didn't care anymore. But I did. And something told me, go. I walked slowly that day, each step full of old hope and new doubt. The lid of the mailbox creaked when I lifted it. And there, tucked between an electric bill and a pizza flyer, was an envelope. My name, written in the careful slanted cursive I'd been dreaming of, a tiny heart next to it. Do you remember that rush of holding something so fragile and knowing it was just for you? Did your hands tremble too, afraid to open it too quickly, afraid the magic might vanish? I sat on the porch and opened it with shaking fingers. The scent of vanilla and ink hit me first. Her words were warm, flowing, full of silly jokes and secret confessions. She told me she loved fireflies too, that she had replayed our last phone call 3 times, that she had written the letter 3 times before settling on this one. She ended it with, "I think I do believe in soulmates. And maybe I think you're mine." That letter became my treasure, folded and refolded until the paper softened. I kept it under my pillow for weeks. I read it by flashlight, under blankets, during thunderstorms, until her words lived inside me. So yes, I remember what it was like to check the mailbox every day with hope. I remember the ache of waiting. I remember the joy of the arrival. And most of all, I remember how love back then had time to grow in the spaces between words. When was the last time you waited days, maybe weeks, for someone to say they missed you? Can you still feel how slow the world used to be? Do you miss it too? Because I do, every single day.
I must have read Rachel's letter at least 20 times before the thought even occurred to me that I needed to write her back. Not just write back. I needed to respond in a way that could match the warmth, the care, the softness in her words. That letter had a heartbeat. It deserved an answer that didn't feel rushed or careless. Something that could sit beside it, folded gently, still carrying a bit of who I was in its fibers. Back then, Replying to a letter wasn't just about putting ink on paper. It was a whole ritual, a quiet, meaningful moment where you tried to pour pieces of your soul into something you could send across town in an envelope. It had to feel like you were reaching through time, through distance, and saying, I see you, I hear you, I feel the same. Do you remember that feeling? When every little detail, every choice felt like it had meaning? When the kind of pen you used mattered because it changed the way your words looked, even sounded in your own head as you wrote them? I did what I always did when something mattered. I turned down the lights in my room, lit the tiny cinnamon-scented candle I kept hidden in an old Altoids tin under my bed, and I sat down with my wooden box of stationery. It was tucked in the bottom drawer of my desk, buried under sketch pads and some old Nintendo Power magazines. Inside were sheets of paper I'd collected over the years, most from birthday gifts, some from old friends, a few I had bought myself at a store that smelled like dried roses and used books. Each sheet had its own personality. Some were simple, pale blue with a faint border. Others had tiny pastel flowers in the corners. I had one with a cartoon Snoopy on a mailbox, but that felt too silly. One had gold edging that shimmered slightly when tilted, but it felt too formal, almost cold. Do you remember running your fingers over the paper to feel the texture before choosing? Do you remember trying to imagine how the person would feel opening it, touching it, smelling it? I finally picked a sheet that was warm cream in color, with a faded lavender design along the top. It reminded me of her somehow. Not flashy, not loud, just gentle, familiar, soft in a way that made your heart slow down. Then came the ink. That choice mattered even more. I had a drawer full of pens. Ballpoints, felt tips, a purple gel pen that glittered when it caught the light. But this wasn't the time for glitter. This was the time for something that spoke slowly. I tested them all on a blank notepad. Black felt too harsh. Red was out of the question, far too aggressive. Blue was classic, but depending on the pen, it could be too generic or too runny. Then I picked up my old favorite, the navy blue Pilot V5. It wasn't fancy, but it flowed like a dream, and it made my writing look steadier than it actually was. I'd used it to write lyrics in my journal, to scribble late-night thoughts when sleep wouldn't come. It had the right soul for this letter. Yes, even pens had souls back then. Some dried out in your hand, others glided across the paper like they understood what you were trying to say. Before writing, I sprayed a soft puff of Mom's lavender perfume near the paper and let it settle. Just a hint. You had to be careful with that. Too much and the letter would reek like the perfume aisle at Woolworth's. Too little and it would just be paper. But the right amount? It would linger. It would become memory. I sat cross-legged on the floor, my back resting against the side of my bed. The candle flickered near my feet, casting shadows on the closet door. My Walkman was playing a quiet loop of the same tape from earlier, but lower now, background comfort. Then I started to write. Dear Rachel. I paused. How do you even begin when the person you're writing to feels like a song you don't want to end? I wanted to tell her everything, that I slept with her letter under my pillow, that I read it when I missed her voice, that her words had become part of my days, the way some people hum a tune or chew on their pencil. But instead, I started slowly, one sentence at a time, letting the words come naturally. I told her what her letter meant to me, how it felt like someone had cracked open a little window in my heart and let in some sunlight. I told her that on the day it arrived, everything else, chores, TV, the sound of lawnmowers outside, faded into the background. I told her I believed in soulmates too, and maybe that's why I couldn't stop thinking about her eyes at the roller rink. Do you remember how writing a letter made you listen to your thoughts more carefully? How it made you pay attention to what you were feeling because suddenly those feelings had to find a shape? As I wrote, I made sure my handwriting was neat, slower than usual. I even practiced a few letters on a scrap page before starting. My R's always came out too sharp. My G's looped strangely. But I wanted every word to be clear. No cross-outs, no smudges. I didn't want her to wonder if I had meant something else, if I had hesitated. I filled the page slowly, then another. I didn't want to stop, but I knew it had to be the right length. Too long and it might feel overwhelming. too short, and it might feel rushed. I added a small drawing at the end, just a doodle of a cassette tape with a tiny heart on it. She'd know what it meant. Then came the envelope. I chose one that matched the paper, tucked the sheets in carefully, aligning the edges, and sealed it with a sticker shaped like a tiny star. Not a big one, just a small silver star from a leftover school supply sheet. Before sealing it completely, I blew gently into the envelope. I used to believe, maybe childishly, that if I breathed on it with love, some of that warmth would reach the other person. Silly, maybe, but it felt right. I wrote her name on the front with slow, careful letters. Rachel M. No last name, just an initial, enough to know it was for her. The address I'd memorized. Her street had a name like something from a dream. Willowbrook Lane. I imagined trees leaning over the sidewalk, their branches full of shade and secrets. Then I placed the stamp. The one with the American flag waving, the corner just barely peeling at the edge. I pressed it down with my thumb for a long time, like sealing a promise. I held the envelope for a minute before placing it in the outgoing tray on the kitchen counter. It would be gone in the morning, picked up while I was still asleep. That night, I slept without the letter under my pillow. It was back in its envelope, in a shoebox beside my bed now, and I was already waiting for hers again. Do you remember how quiet your heart had to be to hear the rhythm of someone else's through their handwriting? Do you remember how sacred it felt to hold their words, their thoughts in your hands? Back then, it wasn't about instant replies or read receipts. It was about writing something real, then letting it go, letting it travel through time and air and hands to land softly in someone else's world. I don't think we understood how magical that was, but I do now.
I thought that after I mailed my response, I would find peace in the waiting, that I would fill my time with distraction, homework, VHS rentals, trips to the corner store. But instead, the silence left behind in the space between letters grew louder. I found myself pulled back again and again to Rachel's words. Her handwriting had become something like a compass for me, something that steadied the days when nothing else made sense. The letter never stayed in the shoebox for long. I tried, at first, to keep it tucked away with the others, like a precious thing too fragile to handle often. But the truth is, I kept opening it. And not just once a day, not just at night, it became a part of my rhythm. I would read it in the morning before school, hiding it under my math book. I would read it again on the bus, careful not to crease it too much. And again after dinner when the world outside my window started to dim and the streetlights flickered on. Each time I read her letter, it was like hearing a song you've loved for years, but catching a new note you hadn't noticed before. There was always something different, something hidden between the lines that revealed itself when I needed it most. Her choice of words, her phrasing, the way she used parentheses to share little side thoughts, all of it had a melody to it. I started memorizing parts without meaning to. I could hear her voice in the sentences, almost as if she were there beside me. Time feels slower when you're waiting for someone you care about, she had written. That line lived in my chest like a quiet echo. I would whisper it to myself in the hallway at school or while walking home alone. Her words felt like someone holding my hand from far away. Do you remember what it was like to reread a letter so many times that you could recite it from memory, but still reach for the paper just to see the way they crossed their T's or curled their Y's? Do you remember how even a smudge, a slight skip in the ink, felt like a fingerprint? The letter began to show its age quickly. The once crisp folds grew soft from being opened so often. The scent of lavender began to fade, but I could still catch it sometimes, like a ghost hiding between the fibers. The paper had a small tear near the bottom where I'd unfolded it too fast once, impatient, almost trembling. But that made it even more personal. It had lived with me now. It had been touched by my fingers, read under my blanket, held against my heart when sleep wouldn't come. I started keeping it under my pillow again, not because I thought it would bring dreams, but because I wanted it close. Some nights I would reach for it in the dark, pull it out quietly,
and read it by the soft orange glow of my nightlight. The house would be silent, except for the creaking floorboards and the hum of the fridge downstairs. And I would lie there, the letter open in my hands, my eyes moving slowly across each word like it was sacred text. Rachel didn't write like someone trying to impress. She wrote like someone who meant every word. There was a line in the second paragraph that simply said, "I think maybe I smile more when I know you're out there somewhere." That line undid me every time. I would trace my finger under it again and again, not really understanding why it hit so hard, only knowing that it did. Do you remember when words didn't just mean things, they felt things? There was no notification sound, no buzz or ping. The moment of connection didn't flash on a screen. It unfolded gently, over and over in the quiet of my room, in the stillness of my own breath. That letter became part of my inner landscape, a place I could return to whenever the real world felt too loud, too gray, too ordinary. At school, everything else started to feel temporary. Assignments, conversations, even the usual lunchtime gossip, they all faded into background noise. I'd walk the hallways with the letter in my backpack, like a secret no one else knew I carried, a piece of another heart folded between my notebooks. Sometimes I would sneak a peek at it during free period, just opening the envelope enough to see the way her handwriting curled around the edges. My best friend, Mark, noticed the difference in me. He leaned over in homeroom one day and said, "You've been spacing out a lot. You okay?" I smiled without explaining. I didn't want to cheapen it by turning it into a conversation. It wasn't something to talk about. It was something to feel. The days between letters stretched like taffy. Waiting for the mailman became a ritual. I would sit near the window after school, watching the street for his slow walk, the way he moved from box to box, like a priest delivering something holy. Every envelope that wasn't hers felt like a small betrayal. Flyers, bills, letters from my parents, all of it became clutter in the space where I was hoping for her. And still, I reread her first letter over and over, because it didn't lose power. If anything, it grew stronger with time. I started noticing things I hadn't noticed before. The way she wrote my name slightly larger than the other words. The little heart she drew in the corner of the last page. The ink blot that looked accidental, but now felt intentional, like a soft imperfection that made it all the more real. Have you ever loved something so much that even the smallest details became symbols? The handwriting itself became like a voice in my head. It changed my own handwriting. I noticed that I began curling my Y's more, just like she did. I started writing on unlined paper to match the way hers looked, even though I usually hated how uneven my lines got. I didn't care. I just wanted to meet her on the same page, literally. Sometimes I would lie on my bed, letter in hand, and imagine the moment she had written it, where she was sitting, what music might have been playing in the background. Maybe she had her window open. Maybe it was raining. Maybe she lit a candle too. The thought that she had touched the paper, that it had traveled from her world to mine, still intact, still carrying the shape of her thoughts, that was magic to me. And I wasn't just rereading a letter. I was living inside it. Her words were a room I could walk into whenever I wanted. A room where nothing hurt, where I wasn't just some teenager with too many feelings and not enough words. In that room, I was someone worth writing to. Someone seen. Someone understood. I didn't know when her next letter would arrive. Maybe in a few days, maybe longer. But I knew this one would last until then. It would keep me company. It already had. Back then, we didn't scroll. We studied. We didn't skim. We savored. And when something beautiful landed in our lives, we didn't rush to the next thing. We stayed. We sat with it. We let it live in us. And sometimes that was enough.
There was something sacred about having something just for myself. In a world that often felt too noisy, too open, too shared, Rachel's letter became a piece of silence I could claim. The more I read it, the more I realized it couldn't just lie out in the open anymore. It needed a home, a real one. Somewhere it wouldn't get smudged by accident or thrown away by mistake. somewhere it would be safe. At first, I kept it under my pillow because it felt close, like I could reach for her words in the middle of the night if I needed them. But then I started worrying it might tear, or worse, that my mom might find it while changing my sheets. She always moved fast, humming and fluffing the pillows without warning. The idea of someone else's hands touching that letter made my chest tighten. It wasn't embarrassment exactly. It was something deeper, something like betrayal. So I found a place. It wasn't fancy, just a small leather-bound journal I'd never actually written in. I'd gotten it as a birthday gift from my aunt 2 years earlier. Back then, it had felt too nice to use, too polished, like I needed a better version of myself to deserve its pages. But now, it felt like fate, the perfect place. Its cover was burgundy and worn at the edges, like it had been waiting for a purpose. I slipped Rachel's letter between the pages, right in the center, where the binding bent ever so slightly, and closed the cover with care. Hiding it felt almost ceremonial. I placed the journal on the top shelf of my closet behind a stack of comic books and a shoebox filled with photos. No one ever looked there. It was too boring, too dusty, too personal. It became our secret sanctuary. Do you remember what it felt like to hide something, not because it was wrong, but because it was too right for the world to touch? I checked on it every night. Sometimes I would pull it down just to hold the journal, to run my fingers along the leather, to feel the shape of the letter pressing lightly through the pages. I wouldn't always read it. Sometimes it was enough just to know it was there. To know that something beautiful, something meant for me, existed in the same room I slept in. There was one night, quiet, heavy with rain, when I pulled the journal down again and took the letter out slowly. The storm outside matched the mood in my chest. I'd had a rough day. Nothing dramatic, just the kind of day where everything felt a little too sharp. A teacher had scolded me for daydreaming in class. My bike chain slipped on the way home. My dad had been in one of his not now moods. That kind of day. But holding the letter, reading her words again under the soft yellow glow of my desk lamp, shifted something. The rain didn't matter. The teacher's tone didn't echo so loudly. The world softened. Rachel's words carried me out of my head and into somewhere safer, somewhere warmer. She'd written, "I wonder if you ever feel like you're in the wrong world, but then a small thing, like a tree or a song or a memory, reminds you that you're still exactly where you belong." That line, I read it at least 10 times that night. And then for the first time, I added something to the journal. Not much, just a few sentences. I flipped to a blank page near the back and wrote what I felt in that exact moment. I didn't try to make it sound poetic. I just needed to capture it. Something like, "I think I needed this letter more than I knew. I'm glad I didn't have to ask for it. I'm glad it came anyway." That's all. But writing it down felt like breathing after holding my breath too long. From then on, the journal wasn't just a hiding place. It became a sort of shared space. Her letter was still the centerpiece, still folded gently between the pages like a pressed flower. But now my own words started blooming around it. Not every day, just when the moment asked for it. Sometimes a sentence, sometimes a paragraph, once a whole page. All in my own messy handwriting, crooked and uncertain, but real. I never signed my name. I didn't need to. The journal knew. It felt like I was building a quiet world inside that book. One where I could feel her voice echoing and my own thoughts finding shape in the space between us. That kind of world couldn't be left on a desk or stuffed in a drawer. It had to be protected. And hiding it wasn't about secrecy. It was about reverence. I started to notice how much I looked forward to checking on it.
Some nights I would even whisper good night to it, as if the letter might carry my voice back to her. Silly, maybe, but real. Honest. The kind of thing you only do when no one's watching and your heart is wide open. Do you remember when hiding something made it feel more alive, not less? I didn't have a lock on my door, so I had to get clever. I rearranged the shelf so the journal was buried deeper. I put a stack of old VHS tapes in front of it. Batman, Home Alone, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. No one would think to move those. And just in case, I started closing my closet door every night. It was a small habit, but it gave me peace. And sometimes when I really missed her, I would hold the journal against my chest and close my eyes. Not to pretend she was there, but to remember that part of her already was. That part of her had traveled all the way to my hands and now lived quietly, just inches from where I slept. Hiding the letter made it feel permanent, like it belonged to my story now. Not just as a memory, but as a chapter that could never be unwritten. It was proof that something real had happened, that someone out there had once sat down, put pen to paper, and chosen me. And so I protected it, not just from the world, but from time. Because some things are too sacred to be shared, too beautiful to risk forgetting, and too rare to let go. The day another letter came, everything around me changed without warning. The light through the window looked softer. The ticking of the clock on the kitchen wall no longer annoyed me. Even the toast I had that morning tasted different, sweeter somehow. I hadn't been expecting anything that day. That's what made it feel like a miracle. When I saw the envelope on the table, my fingers hesitated before touching it, like I was about to make contact with something sacred again. My name was written in the same flowing, confident handwriting that had already etched itself into my memory. Just seeing the way she curled her R's made my stomach flip. Rachel had a way of writing like she wasn't afraid of the page, as if the pen simply moved with her thoughts, and her thoughts never wavered. It made me want to be more certain in everything I did. But before I even opened it, before I even lifted the corner of the flap, I held it in both hands and closed my eyes. It had weight. That was the first thing I noticed. The envelope wasn't flimsy. It had substance, like a secret tucked inside. I tilted it gently back and forth, listening closely for the soft shift of paper. Was it a single sheet again? Or maybe two this time? I imagined a tiny sketch folded inside, maybe something silly she doodled in the margins of her math class, or perhaps a pressed flower, flattened between layers of lined paper, fragile and scented. My fingers gently pressed along the seams, not to open it, but to understand it. There was something beautiful in not knowing yet. That brief window of time between receiving and reading, where the mind could fly without boundaries. The moment before truth arrived, when hope and possibility danced together. I imagined her hand folding the pages carefully, her eyes deciding whether or not to include that little heart at the bottom, her lips curling into a half smile as she sealed the envelope. Did she hesitate before sending it? Did she reread her words 100 times like I did? I placed the envelope on my desk and sat across from it like it was a person. The anticipation was almost too much. My fingers ached to tear it open, but my heart whispered, wait. Sometimes it was the waiting that made it holy. The more I sat with it, the more my mind spiraled with questions. What if this letter said something new, something different? What if it had a deeper tone or something unsaid between the lines? What if she told me something that changed everything? I leaned back in my chair and let myself imagine. Maybe she'd written about a memory we shared, one I had forgotten until her words brought it back, like a photograph developing in slow motion. Maybe she'd drawn a map, a tiny one, leading to some place only we understood. This letter was shorter than the last, but more intense, like she had written it quickly, right after something important happened. The possibilities were endless. In that moment, the envelope held a universe. Do you remember what it felt like to imagine what someone meant before they said it? That kind of guessing wasn't frustrating. It was sacred. It was proof that the connection between two people could stretch even across silence, even across distance. My fingertips tingled. My breath slowed. I picked up the envelope again and held it to my chest, just for a moment, like pressing it closer might reveal something through the paper. I finally opened it with as much care as someone might open a gift on Christmas morning, the kind of gift that isn't wrapped in shiny ribbons, but in quiet hope. The seal broke with a soft sound that echoed in my chest. I slid my fingers inside and felt the paper against my skin. One sheet? No, two. Definitely two. My pulse quickened. That meant she had more to say, more space, more room for pauses and run-on thoughts, more of her. The first page smelled faintly like vanilla. I smiled. She must have sprayed her perfume again. It wasn't overwhelming, just enough to let me know she had touched this paper not long ago. I hadn't even read the first word, and I already felt like she was with me. I took the second sheet out and saw something drawn in the bottom corner. A little bird, wings open, like it was mid-flight. It wasn't perfect. Its legs were uneven and one eye was bigger than the other, but that only made it more real. I hadn't even read the words yet, but the weight of that envelope had delivered more than I'd imagined. The anticipation had been part of the gift. Feeling the envelope, studying its thickness, imagining its contents. It was like receiving love in layers. First the surprise, then the possibilities, then the truth. And somehow every layer felt just as important as the letter itself. It reminded me that love doesn't always arrive in declarations or grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives quietly, folded in half, tucked inside a standard white envelope, with a postage stamp slightly crooked in the corner. After reading the letter, slowly, savoring every line, I placed it next to the first inside the journal. The two sat side by side now, like old friends. The journal grew heavier, not just in weight, but in meaning. It was becoming a collection, not just of her words, but of my responses, my breaths, my memories, all captured between pages. Each new letter would join the others in this growing archive of a connection unfolding one envelope at a time. And yet, I found myself unable to throw the envelope away. I flattened it gently, smoothed the seal, and tucked it between the last page and the back cover. Even its presence mattered. The way it had protected her words, the way it had cradled something so important, the way it had made me feel even before I knew what was inside. Love, I was learning, wasn't just in the message, it was in the envelope.
There was a quiet kind of thrill that came from seeing a new envelope among the regular clutter of daily life. Bills, flyers, newsletters, grocery lists, all of them faded into the background the moment I caught even a glimpse of her handwriting. It didn't matter if the letter was half buried under other mail or slipped casually into a pile by someone who didn't realize its importance. The moment my eyes landed on that familiar script, my heart reacted faster than my mind could catch up. Her handwriting had become more than a pattern of letters. It had become a signal, a promise, a code my body understood before my thoughts could articulate it. That first swoop of the R, the gentle tilt of the L, the way her O's were always perfectly round and her T's were confidently crossed. It was like hearing her voice, only with my eyes. I could recognize it from across the room, even in the middle of conversations or distractions. And every time I did, it felt like the world tilted slightly in my direction. The envelope didn't need to say her name anymore. Her penmanship was her signature. I began to associate that style with warmth, safety, excitement, and longing all at once. It didn't even have to be addressed to me in full. A quick glance at that graceful lettering and the rest of the world quieted. My breathing changed. My thoughts paused. The atmosphere shifted, subtly but completely. Sometimes the envelope would be waiting for me in the hallway, propped up against the door as if it had legs and had walked there by itself. Other times I'd find it placed carefully between pages of a book I had left open the night before. My sister once handed me the mail and said nothing, but the slight smile on her face told me she'd noticed the change in my expression the moment I spotted it. She knew what that kind of joy looked like. It wasn't something you could fake. One rainy afternoon, I came home soaked from head to toe, annoyed by the sudden storm and the ache in my shoulders. As I entered the kitchen, dripping and tired, my eyes instinctively scanned the counter. I wasn't expecting anything. I had stopped counting the days between letters. That was part of the charm, never knowing when one might appear. And then, between a coupon booklet and a bank statement, there it was, her handwriting, a lifeline in ink. At that instant, I forgot I was wet, forgot I was cold, forgot I had left my backpack on the floor and my shoes tracking mud. I reached for the envelope and held it like it might dissolve if I didn't. The water on my fingertips made me nervous. I didn't want to smudge a single line of that script I had come to cherish so deeply. I rushed to dry my hands, my heart beating wildly, afraid I might have damaged the most sacred thing I'd touched that day. What was it about seeing her handwriting that felt so electric? It wasn't just the aesthetics, it was the connection. This was something she had done herself. No screen, no keyboard, no autocorrect, just her hand, her pen, and the intention to reach me exactly as she was. Even if the words inside were simple, the writing itself told me everything. It told me she was thinking of me. It told me she had made time. It told me I mattered. There were letters where she seemed rushed, ink pressed darker in places, sentences crowded together, but even then her personality came through. I could imagine her sitting at her desk late at night, one leg curled under the other, writing by lamplight. I saw her smile when she wrote something funny. I heard her sighs when the words got heavy. I felt the pauses between sentences as if I'd been there with her, waiting. I kept wondering if my handwriting had the same effect on her. Did she recognize it instantly too? Did she feel a similar rush when she saw the slant of my letters? I hope so. I hope that somewhere on her side of this quiet miracle, she was also holding an envelope, also breathless from the sight of something so unmistakably personal. It's strange how much intimacy can live in lines and loops. Her name written in her own hand meant more than any typed message ever could. There was something powerful about recognizing her without a photo, without a voice, without a presence, just ink on paper. Yet it was enough to make my chest ache in the best way. Every time I saw that handwriting again, it felt like returning to a part of myself I hadn't realized had gone missing. The rest of the world still existed, of course. My parents talked in the background. My school assignments waited unfinished. The weather outside shifted without asking permission. But all of that became background noise the moment I saw that familiar penmanship. The swoops, the curves, the small imperfections. It was her. Every time. And it was all I needed. It didn't matter how long the letter was. It could be 3 pages or 3 sentences. What mattered was that she had chosen to write, that she had held this same piece of paper, that her fingers had moved across it, that her thoughts had landed there before mine would have. In some mysterious way, the paper still held the echo of her presence.
And before I even read a single word, I already felt closer to her. Some days I didn't even open the letter right away. I would sit with it, hold it, study the handwriting, and let it speak for itself. It said, "I'm here." It said, "I still think of you." It said, "I care enough to write this with my own hand." And that was enough to keep me going. Love, I realized, could exist in the details we often overlook, in handwriting, in the press of a pen, in the pause between one letter and the next. And for as long as the letters came, I would keep recognizing her the second I saw that envelope. I would keep feeling that spark, that certainty, that heartbeat that said, "This is from her." And I would keep reading each one with the same reverence as the first.
Before my eyes could scan the first word, before my hands could unfold the carefully folded sheets, there was always that moment of stillness, a pause where my fingers brushed against the envelope like I was holding something delicate and sacred. And in that quiet space between anticipation and reading, I would bring the letter closer, not to see, but to smell. It became a ritual, one I never questioned. I would lift the envelope just beneath my nose, close my eyes, and breathe in slowly. Sometimes there was nothing but the dry, papery scent of the stationery itself, a scent that carried its own kind of comfort, like the warm pages of a favorite book. But other times, oh, those rare and beautiful times, the paper came alive with traces of her, faint, elusive hints of something floral or soft, a whisper of her perfume that had clung to the fibers of the page like a secret only I was allowed to know. It was never overwhelming, just subtle enough to stir memories. There were days when I could swear I smelled her hair in the creases, or the faint vanilla lotion she always kept in her bag. And sometimes, if I held the paper long enough, I could even imagine the scent of the room she wrote in. Maybe lavender by the windowsill, or freshly brewed tea on a late afternoon. That aroma, gentle and imperfect, transformed the distance between us into something smaller. The miles didn't vanish, but they softened. They folded, like the paper itself, into something I could hold. It was more than nostalgia. It was presence. That scent was proof she had been there, proof that this wasn't just ink and paper. It was her. I'd press the letter to my chest, as if the warmth of my body might bring her words closer. And sometimes, when the world was too loud, I'd retreat to the same quiet corner of my room, lie back, and inhale her scent again and again like a lifeline. I didn't need photographs. I didn't need a voice note. I needed this fragile, invisible tether that tied her world to mine. There was a particular letter, I still remember it, that arrived in late spring. The air was already thick with anticipation, school was nearing its end, and everything felt like it was in bloom, even the ache in my chest. I remember tearing the top carefully, unfolding the letter with trembling hands. I didn't even glance at the words at first. The scent hit me before anything else did. A soft, sweet fragrance that reminded me of the first time she had leaned in to whisper something that made me laugh. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. That scent didn't just remind me of her, it became her. In that moment, she was sitting beside me, cross-legged on my bed, her smile echoing between the folds of paper. It amazed me how something so intangible could be so powerful, how fragrance, like memory, could defy logic and collapse time. One breath, and suddenly I was nowhere and everywhere with her. In the park, on the school steps, beneath the streetlight where we first said goodbye. After that, I started paying more attention to the scent of everything she sent. Even when she didn't wear perfume or forgot to, I'd search for clues. Was there a trace of her shampoo? The scent of her room on the stationery? The tiniest bit of ink smudged by her wrist as she wrote? I held on to it all. And when I missed her too much to bear it, I'd go back, lift a letter from its hiding place, and breathe in as if it could bring her back. Sometimes it almost did. Scent had a way of surviving longer than sound, longer than sight. I'd forget the exact words she wrote or how she signed the letter, but I'd remember how it smelled.
That fragrance was woven into the memory, becoming inseparable from the emotion. There were days I didn't need to reread a single line. I just needed to touch the paper, bring it close, and inhale like someone remembering how to feel. In time, my drawer of letters became more than a collection of words. It became an archive of her presence. Each envelope held not just sentences, but sensations. And even as the letters aged, some still held the faintest trace of her, like an echo, like a breath frozen in time. The scent faded, yes, but the memory of it never did. It lingered, especially on lonely nights when I missed her most. It waited for me, like she always had, within the folds of a simple letter. Sometimes I wondered if she did the same with mine. Did she bring my letters to her face and search for the scent of me? Did she close her eyes and pretend, even for a second, that I was right there whispering through the fibers of the paper? I hoped so. I hoped that across the distance, our scents found each other, mingling invisibly in the spaces we both ached to fill. And so I kept that ritual. Every new letter, every fresh envelope, every piece of paper she touched, I smelled it first. Like the first breath after waking from a dream. Like the only proof I needed that she was real, and that what we had was more than just longing. It was connection. It was intimacy. It was love written not just in ink, but in air.
There was a strange kind of silence after I dropped my reply into the mailbox. Not the kind of silence that follows an argument or the quiet of an empty room, but the kind that buzzes, that hums beneath the skin. The moment the letter disappeared behind the blue metal door, I stood there a second longer than necessary, as if the sound of it falling into the pile below somehow marked the beginning of something sacred. And then the waiting began. Time stretched in peculiar ways. A day wasn't just 24 hours anymore. It became a loop of wondering, doubting, hoping, replaying each sentence I had written in my mind over and over. Had I said too much? Had I said enough? Was my handwriting clear? Did my words carry the emotion I meant them to? I'd imagine her holding the envelope, seeing her name in my familiar script, the way her face might light up when she recognized it. Did she read it in one breath, or did she take her time, like I always did? I pictured her sitting cross-legged on her bed, biting her lower lip while unfolding the paper. Maybe she smiled at my silly jokes, or paused when she got to the part where I told her I missed her. Did her heart skip a beat when I wrote that I remembered the way her eyes looked under the lamplight? Or did she skim past that part, already thinking about what she would write back? The waiting gave my imagination room to run wild, and I let it, because in those invisible spaces between letters, imagination was all I had. Every knock at the door, every rustle of mail being pushed through the slot, every chirp of birds that might mean the mailman was near, it all made my breath hitch. I'd rush to check, heart hammering, only to find bills, flyers, postcards from relatives who didn't know the value of what I was truly waiting for. Sometimes the waiting went on for days. Other times, weeks passed without word, and I'd start to fear that my letter had gotten lost, or worse, that it had arrived and simply hadn't meant as much to her as hers did to me. Those were the hardest days, the ones when silence filled the gaps like cold air, when nothing arrived, and I was left to wrestle with invisible questions. Did she laugh at what I wrote? Did she cry? Did she feel anything at all? The ache wasn't always painful. It was tender, delicate, a soft yearning that never fully left, that clung to me like a familiar melody I couldn't shake. And despite everything, despite the lack of a reply, I never stopped hoping. Some nights I'd lie awake replaying possible scenarios in my mind like film reels. I saw her twirling the envelope in her fingers, imagining the texture of the paper, the exact way the ink looked against the off-white sheet. I wondered if she read it twice, or if she folded it neatly and slipped it under her pillow like I always did. Maybe she traced the lines of my words with her fingertip. Maybe she even held it to her heart the way I did with hers. And then I imagined her trying to write back. I pictured her sitting at her desk, chewing on the end of her pen,
struggling to find the right words the way I had. I imagined her starting a sentence, crossing it out, rewriting it again. Maybe she stared at the blank paper for hours, trying to get it just right. The thought comforted me that she might be as nervous and excited as I was, that maybe she too reread my letter a dozen times before even picking up a pen. Every little thing fed my daydreams. A song on the radio, the scent of blooming flowers, a sudden breeze on an otherwise still day. I'd take them as signs, hints from the universe that something was moving, that her response was being written, that soon, very soon, I would hold another piece of her heart in my hands. I lived inside those small signs, clinging to them with hope so bright it could light up even the longest days. Then there were the days when doubt crept in like an unwelcome guest. The days when I asked myself whether I had made her uncomfortable, whether my feelings had grown faster than hers, whether she was afraid to write back because she didn't know how to let me down gently. Those were the hours I paced the room, stopping only to reread her last letter, searching for clues, for any hint that what I felt wasn't one-sided. I told myself to be patient, that good things took time. But the mind doesn't work in straight lines. It loops, it spirals. And yet, despite the worry, I never lost the thrill of anticipation. It was a quiet thrill, the kind that fills the space between exhale and inhale, like waiting for the lights to dim before a play begins, like hearing your name whispered in a crowded room. I'd stare at the calendar, count the days since my last letter, and mark imaginary delivery dates with pencil, hoping I'd need to erase and rewrite sooner than expected. Sometimes I even dreamed of her letter arriving, dreamed of waking up to the scent of her ink, only to be disappointed by morning. But, oh, the joy when the letter finally came. That joy deserves its own chapter. The way the world stood still the moment I saw my name in her handwriting. How everything that came before, the waiting, the doubting, the hoping, collapsed into a single breathless moment of wonder. But until then, the waiting itself was its own kind of love. Because in those days of silence, I discovered just how deeply I could care, how much a simple envelope could mean, how the imagination could carry a heart thousands of miles without a single step. So I waited, not always patiently, but always with love. And as I waited, I whispered the same questions again and again into the air, hoping they might find her. Did you smile? Did your heart skip a beat when you saw my letter? Did you think of me while reading it? Because I thought of you while writing every word.
There was something indescribably intimate about reading her letters. Not just the words themselves, though they carried their own weight and wonder, but the way they were written. The ink didn't merely form letters and sentences, it whispered, it shook. It bled into the page in places where her hand might have trembled, or where her emotions pressed too hard against the pen. That trembling, that barely noticeable wobble in the letters said more than entire paragraphs could. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. The way she curled her Y's, the extra loop on her G, the occasional smudge where maybe her hand brushed the wet ink or where a tear might have fallen and dried before I ever saw it. Each of those imperfections made the letter feel more alive, more human. She wasn't just writing to me, she was reaching. Each word seemed to stretch across the distance between us, tugging gently at my heart, pulling me closer to her in a way that no photograph or phone call ever could. Her letters had rhythm, and that rhythm became familiar. It matched the pace of her thoughts, the cadence of her voice as I imagined it. I could tell when she wrote something quickly, excitement pouring out faster than she could contain it. I could also tell when she paused, when she thought too long before writing, the ink darker in some spots where the pen had lingered a second too long. Those moments revealed her inner world, her vulnerability, her care,
her effort to be understood. And the words, oh, the words were like small doors into her soul. She didn't need to write poetry. Her honesty was enough. A simple sentence like, "I thought of you when it rained yesterday," meant more than pages of elaborate metaphors, because I knew her. I knew how she looked at the world. I knew how certain smells or sounds brought me to mind. And when she said something like that, I could feel her with me. I could feel the rain too, the gray skies, the quiet moments when she might have turned her face toward the window and whispered my name to herself. Sometimes she apologized for the messiness of her handwriting. I never understood why. To me, her handwriting was perfect. It carried her pulse. It was like reading her emotions through the rise and fall of each line. There were days when I traced the curves of her letters with my finger, as if that small gesture could bring me closer. And strangely, it did. It made the paper warmer somehow. It made me believe I could reach her, even from where I sat, miles away, alone, letter in hand. It wasn't the same as being there, of course. Nothing could replace the feel of her fingers brushing against mine, the way her laughter filled the space around us. But her letters came close. They were stitched together with affection, attention, patience. She didn't just write to pass time, she wrote with care. She wrote as though her heart was spilling onto the page, but in slow, deliberate drops. Every time I unfolded a letter from her, I felt like I was being let into a room where she kept the most sacred parts of herself. That level of closeness was rare, and I didn't take it for granted. The paper carried more than words. It carried breath, longing, daydreams. It carried the echo of her voice reading the sentences aloud before committing them to ink. And I imagined her leaning over the page, tucking a lock of hair behind her ear, mouthing the words as she wrote them. I imagined her smiling mid-sentence, then frowning, crossing something out, then rewriting it with more precision. And somehow all of that, the effort, the sincerity, made me feel loved in a way I never expected. Because love wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was a shaky line. Sometimes it was the way she pressed harder when she wrote my name. Sometimes it was the care taken to write each sentence as if it mattered. And it did matter. Every line mattered. Every comma. Every sigh she might have breathed before continuing. It all wove together into something intimate and irreplaceable. I didn't just read her letters, I felt them. And feeling them made me feel less alone. The distance didn't close. Not physically, but emotionally it did. The paper acted like a bridge between us, fragile but firm, suspended over all the miles and days that separated our realities. In that space, between the ink and the paper, we found each other, again and again. There were moments I'd sit with her letters in my lap and close my eyes, pretending she was reading them aloud. Her voice, imagined but unmistakable, would speak softly in my mind, bringing the words to life in ways only love can. I'd respond out loud sometimes, quietly, foolishly, saying things like, "I remember that day too," or, "Yes, I miss you," as if she could hear me, as if the air between us carried sound as easily as the mail carried our words. And sometimes it did feel like she could hear me, as if she'd written certain things knowing exactly what I needed, even though I'd never told her. Like she could read my silences, the spaces between my own words. That was the kind of connection we had. One that didn't need constant communication to survive. One that grew stronger each time a letter found its way into my hands, trembling and true. The handwriting itself became a comfort. I began to recognize her mood just by looking at the shape of her letters. When the lines were neat and fluid, I imagined her writing with ease, in peace. When they were scattered or slanted, I knew something had stirred her, excitement, worry, maybe even sadness. And I'd read those letters more carefully, slowly,
trying to understand everything she wasn't saying directly, because sometimes the most important parts weren't written in ink. They were tucked between the lines, in the spaces where meaning lived quietly. I read those too. I learned to listen with my eyes, to feel with my heart, and in that way, she taught me something profound. She taught me how to love in silence, how to hear someone without sound, how to be present across an ocean of days and longing. She was always with me, even when she wasn't, all because of those trembling letters, those careful words. Love had never felt so handwritten.
There came a moment, somewhere between the 10th and the 15th letter, when I began to understand something I hadn't seen before, not fully. It struck me while I sat beneath the old oak tree behind my house, her latest letter unfolded in my hands, sunlight sliding over the ink. I realized the waiting wasn't just part of the process, it was part of the beauty. The anticipation, the space between her words and their arrival, the ache of silence before the joy of discovery, none of it was wasted. The delay gave weight to the message. It made the love more vivid, more present, more enduring. In a world that moves faster than our hearts can sometimes handle, her letters were slow, deliberate gifts. Each one had time carved into it. It had days of her thoughts gathered like wildflowers, pressed between lines and tucked into envelopes. The waiting shaped the way I received her. It made me pause. It made me breathe slower. And it made me listen, not just to her, but to myself, to my own heart, which beat louder in the quiet. There was a richness in that stillness. I began to savor everything about the letters, not just the content, but the rituals surrounding them. The days before they came were filled with restless wonder. I'd walk by the mailbox more times than I care to admit, pretending not to hope too hard. And when a letter finally did arrive, when I saw that familiar handwriting, it felt like a small miracle. Time softened in those moments. The past and the present folded into each other, and I felt, truly, that love was not something confined by distance or days. The longer I waited, the deeper the connection felt, not because the longing was pleasant, but because it was real. It made me realize how much I cared, how much she mattered. It reminded me that things worth having often take time, and when something finally arrives, something you've longed for, imagined, prayed for, the moment becomes sacred. I read her letters with reverence, as though they carried the scent of something eternal, because, in a way, they did. Our world was not fast. Our story unfolded slowly, like a novel you never want to end. There were no notifications, no instant responses, no read receipts, just silence, followed by heart. And somehow, that silence taught me more about her than 1,000 conversations ever could. It showed me what kind of person she was: patient, thoughtful, intentional. The kind of person who didn't rush love, who let it grow like ivy, steady, strong, a little wild, but always rooted. Looking back now, I understand that the waiting was the romance. The slowness gave it shape, it gave it mystery, and it gave it memory. I don't remember every word she wrote, but I remember the feeling of waiting for those words. The afternoons I sat with the window open, hoping to catch a breeze or a postman. The way my hands shook when I tore the envelope open. The breath I held before reading the first line. That anticipation became part of the love story, and that love, nurtured in the quiet, deepened in the delay, became unforgettable. Even the ache of not hearing from her was beautiful in its own way. It meant she mattered. It meant I was invested. It meant I was alive. And in those in-between moments, I often found myself writing letters I never sent, letters full of things I couldn't say out loud. Waiting gave me time to feel fully, to think, to understand. And when her reply came, it wasn't just an answer, it was a reunion, a meeting of hearts on paper. People often say that love is action, that it's what you do, not what you say. But I think sometimes love is also in the waiting, in the decision to stay when the silence grows long, in the choice to believe that someone, somewhere, is thinking of you just as much as you're thinking of them. And in that kind of waiting, something sacred is born, not desperation, but devotion, not impatience, but trust. When I held her letters now, I saw more than ink. I saw time. I saw proof that two people could remain close across weeks, miles, silences. I saw that love could survive without constant connection, as long as the connection was true. And the truth was always there, in the tremble of her handwriting, in the careful folding of the page, in the perfume that lingered just faintly, like a whisper against the cheek. I sometimes wondered if she felt the same, if she counted days the way I did, if she slept with my letter under her pillow or tucked it into a book for safekeeping, if she guessed what I might be doing as she wrote, imagining me reading her words by candlelight or beside an open window. That wondering kept me soft. It kept me faithful. It kept me reaching. And now, even after the letters have stopped, even after time has done what time does, moving forward whether we're ready or not, I still remember that feeling, that old mailbox, that trembling hope, that slow-burning kind of love that doesn't just fill a moment, but fills a lifetime. It taught me to listen. It taught me to wait. And it taught me that love, when it is real, is worth every silent day, every unanswered hour, every ache of longing. Because love that waits is love that stays, and I will carry that kind of love with me always.